Good afternoon and welcome to Omaha, Nebraska and to the University of Nebraska Omaha. I'm John Christensen, the lucky one who serves as chancellor of this special university in this very, very special city. Now, whether you traveled from Los Angeles or New York City, from somewhere in the Midwest, or from Dundee, the neighborhood down the street, on behalf of the UNO students, faculty, and staff, we are very, very proud you are with us today and that UNO is the host of the Aspen Institute and the Buffett Early Childhood Institute gathering and panel discussion. Today we have many state and local officials with us in the audience. I would ask our elected officials to please stand and be recognized. And thank you for joining us today. An afternoon like this fits perfectly with our mission as an urban and a metropolitan university, which is an absolute commitment to being stewards of place and partnering with our city to address challenges and capture opportunities for the betterment of our citizens. The challenge we're here to talk about today is early childhood education and how it is we can maximize strategies whereby brightening the future for all children. To me, Frederick Douglass perfectly framed the issue. He said it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. We share the belief that early education provides the essential foundation for lifelong learning and look forward to hearing from community leaders, distinguished philanthropists, policy experts, and scholars with us today about what the future may hold. Looking around this room, it is a pleasure to see the literal connection of so many different communities from across the United States joined here in the Strauss Performing Arts Center with clarity of purpose to celebrate 50 years of a groundbreaking and life-changing program, Head Start. In May of 1965, President Lyndon Johnson officially announced the creation of Head Start. And from the White House Rose Garden, he said, "I believe that this is one of the most constructive, one of the most sensible, and also one of the most exciting programs that this nation has ever undertaken." Simply said, he was right. The program would positively change the trajectory for more than 3 million children. The same innovative and caring spirit that created Head Start in 1965, it's here in Nebraska today, it's alive, and it's well in so many ways. There is no better example than the Buffett Early Childhood Institute. When the University of Nebraska and a special supporter, Susie Buffett, joined together with a shared vision to create a 4-campus initiative, they asked these questions. What if? What if the gap between optimal child development and what happens with at-risk children could be closed? What if all children, no matter what their background is, have equal opportunities for success? What if we could be doing more as a university and as a state to protect and support our children? The vision of the Buffett Early Childhood Institute is to make Nebraska the best place in the nation to be a baby. The Institute's work is to promote the development and learning of children from birth through age 8 with special focus on our at-risk children. After the creation of the Institute, the next step was to go out and find the world's leading expert in early childhood development and education, and that was accomplished when Dr. Sam Meisels started as the executive director of the Buffett Early Childhood Institute in June 2013. We are proud that the administrative home for the Institute is on this campus, located, not surprisingly, in our first of its kind Barbara White's Community Engagement Center. Now, you will often hear Sam say, there is no public university, no other public university in the nation that has committed itself to young children at risk and their families. By creating the Buffett Early Child Institute, the University of Nebraska is on a unique course. I am certain with Sam's leadership, the course we set here will be a replicable national model for moving forward. Sam, thank you. Thank you, and thanks to Brian Hastings and the University of Nebraska Foundation for helping us bring the Aspen Institute to UNO today for this important panel. Walter, you, your team, and the Aspen Institute members are welcome here at UNO anytime, and I hope it's often. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Eric Motley, the Vice President of the Aspen Institute and the Executive Director of Aspen Across America. I would ask you to please join me in welcoming Dr. Motley.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. And if I could also say thanks to Rose, many thanks to Rose and Shannon and Lori and Annie, who are with the Institute as well as with the Foundation. And if I may, on behalf of our trustees who are here, our chairman-elect, Mr. Crown, our chairman, Bob Seal, who's with us, and all the trustees that are with us, and our fellows from all across the country and world, even London, I'd like to thank you for coming and participating in this program. We're very happy that all of you are here. As we talk about ideas this afternoon, I think it is fitting that we also recognize the idea of remembrance, as this is September the 11th. Ideas define us individually and collectively. Susie Buffett had a big idea when she created the Institute for Early Childhood Education here at the University of Nebraska. She had a great idea when she expressed to me her interest in partnering with the Aspen Institute. So I want to thank Susie for her leadership and her innovation in creating this institute and for building wonderful partnerships beyond Nebraska and addressing this very critical issue that we're here to talk about today. For over 60 years, the Aspen Institute has been committed to convening scholars and experts and partners and collaborators in addressing the most critical issues that confront us in society today. So it is fitting and right that we are here in Omaha at this place addressing this critical issue. And we have no better panel than the exceptional panel that we have here. To my right, we have three of the country's leading philanthropists who have decided that they're going to move thought to action, not just write checks, but to be actively engaged in finding viable solutions. We have George Kaiser from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We have Jackie Bezos. We have J.B. Pritzker. And next to J.B. Pritzker, we have one of the best governors, even though he's former, Deval Patrick, who is a strong advocate for childhood education in the state of Massachusetts. And of course, you've been introduced to Dr. Sam Meisels, who was at the Erickson Institute in Chicago, who's been one of the foremost experts and scholars in moving this conversation forward. And of course, my great boss, Walter Isaacson, who's the former president of Time Magazine, editor of Time Magazine and CNN, who is also the former chair of Teach for America, who has been very actively engaged in making sure that this conversation stays on the forefront of the Aspen Institute's mission to educate, inform, and to transform society. Walter, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chancellor. It's great to be here with you in this wonderful place. Thank you, Eric, or Dr. Motley, as you get called on a wonderful stage like this. I want everybody to understand how much Eric has done to create programs like this, and also to give him a round of applause because he just got promoted to the corporate secretary of the Aspen Institute as well last week. Thank you, Eric. And the person who promoted him was Amy Marjoram Berg, who's sitting there, and I want to thank Gilchrist Berg because he's helped make this whole thing possible too. So it's wonderful to be here amongst family. Thank you all. As the Chancellor said, 50 years ago was an important time. There were three major pieces of civil rights legislation. We all know about the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, but amid that was also the act that created Head Start. It wasn't just a social program. It certainly wasn't even conceived that much as an educational program, but it was really partly a poverty program and a civil rights program. We haven't exactly made an enormous amount of progress in the war on poverty since then, but if there is going to be a battlefield on which we must fight, it is early childhood education. I'm going to start with you, Professor Meisels, if I may, to give us your assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of Head Start.
Thank you. Let me start by wishing Head Start a happy 50th birthday. And I want to share some basic facts about Head Start, so we have that as a starting place. First of all, more than 32 million children have been served by Head Start across its 50 years, and many of those children, of course, were enrolled in Head Start for multiple years. It's the only national program of early care and education that's ever existed in the U.S. Head Start was created to be a national program for child development and family support, and particularly for 3- and 4-year-olds living in poverty. It had, from the very beginning, more than just an education focus. It had what we call a whole child focus, including education and health, nutrition, social services, and programs for parents. In 1995, this 3- and 4-year-old program was expanded to include birth to 3-year-olds in a program that's known as Early Head Start. It is funded through a federal appropriation to the Department of Health and Human Services that this year is around more than $7 billion, serving roughly 900,000 or a little bit more than 900,000 children birthed through age 5. Head Start funds are very unusual in that they flow directly from the federal government to local agencies that are the grantees for Head Start. There are about 1,800 grantees across the country operating roughly 16,000 early childhood Head Start programs. And actually, of those, there's still more classrooms. So it's like a pyramid, if you think of it from that way. Nevertheless, fewer than 4% of birth to 3 children eligible for early Head Start are receiving early Head Start, and fewer than 40% of 3- and 4-year-olds who are eligible for those programs are enrolled in those programs. When Head Start was created 50 years ago, we knew very little about child development and really little less even about how to help children who are at high risk, children born into poverty. Although Head Start has not been solely responsible for what we've learned over these years, it's had a major role in it. So I'm going to take a moment and just list quickly 5 different areas where we have seen tremendous change over these last years. First, our understanding of infancy. As Jim Heckman has said, learning starts in infancy long before formal education begins and continues to have an impact throughout life. Brain growth. We now know that more brain growth occurs in the first 5 years of life than at any other time in a person's life. Relationships. We've learned that the foundations for later learning, behavior, and health are built on nurturing relationships and responsive interactions. These relationships build strong brain architecture that can reduce traumatic brain injury. Timing. Head Start has taught us that it's more efficient biologically and economically to get things right the first time rather than to try to remediate them later. And then environment. A child's environment and early life experiences can be woven into the child's neurological and biological infrastructure for years to come. Early intervention for children at risk is a necessity. Now, all of us on this panel, I think, have gained a great deal from our experience. We've made tremendous, all of us, commitments to early childhood, and we are the fortunate recipients of the knowledge base that has grown over these years. For me, it's been a very personal experience. My previous position before coming here was as president of Aspen Institute, which is a graduate school in child development in Chicago. Erickson would not have existed were it not for Head Start. In 1966, the year after Head Start began, Erickson was founded in order to prepare professionals to teach, to work in classrooms, in Head Start classrooms. One of the founders of Erickson was Irving Harris, a philanthropist, investor, and businessman. He was a mentor to me, to J.B. Pritzker, and to probably several more people who are here today. Irving's commitment, like that of the creators of Head Start, was to foster human potential. He could not abide that potential, the loss of that potential, and the lesson I took away from my time with him was that no human potential should go unfulfilled. This was his message, and this is the message of Head Start. The big picture about Head Start is closing the achievement gap, changing the trajectory for young children at risk, and supporting families and communities. These are the important lessons of Head Start. They are as true today as they were 50 years ago.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'm going to hop around, if I may, sort of in reverse chronology. We're going to talk about pre-K and early childhood, and then go down to birth, and then even pre-birth, so that we will talk about how important each stage is. But if you don't mind, let me go to Governor Patrick for a moment, which is you've had to incorporate the whole concept of Head Start into a major initiative you and also President Obama has been proposing, which is universal pre-K. First of all, why should it be universal? And secondly, how does that wrap around things like Head Start?
Well, first of all, thank you, Walter, for the question, and thank you, Dr. Meisels, for the extraordinary dissertation on the results of Head Start, which is incredibly important. I share in the gratitude of Head Start, and I wish Head Start a happy birthday as well. I think in Massachusetts, what we realized was that as good as Head Start was, it wasn't enough, and we were going to have to come behind it with additional programs and additional opportunities for children. And frankly, when we talk about universal, we're talking about mainly how we get to the kids who wouldn't get it anyway. Meaning, in the neighborhood where I live in a upper middle class neighborhood, we're very fortunate. We do for our children what I think we'd all wish to do for our children, and many do in terms of lessons and opportunities and exposure. And yet there are many, many children, as we all know, who don't get those opportunities. We had two particular challenges I think we faced in moving these programs out more broadly. One was complacency, because our students for the last 6 or 7 years anyway have ranked #1 in the nation in student achievement, at or near the top in the world in math and science. And we love those bragging rights, but for all that time and longer, we'd had a persistent achievement gap. And the kids stuck in that gap are poor, or kids who speak English as a second language, or who have special needs. And to have an achievement gap at all is an economic and a social problem. But to let it persist for as long as we did, 15 years, that's a moral issue, right? Because those are our children too.
Right.
And so the first question was, how do we get past this complacency, this bragging right thing that we had going on? And then the other, I think, is a challenge more endemic to American politics, frankly, and in my experience, it's sort of leaked over from American business. And that's this incredible focus, overemphasis on the short term, When I was in business, there was so much pressure to manage quarter by quarter. Sometimes, I think, not paying due attention to the long-term interests of the enterprise. And I think that bad habit has crept into the way we govern in this country, where we govern from election cycle to election cycle, or news cycle to news cycle, and not generation to generation. And you can't make an investment in early childhood education, Walter, expecting to see the result in time for the next election. You got to wait for it. It's there. It's been shown. There are lots of data points, but you got to wait for it. And that takes a particular kind of discipline, I think, in our modern politics. And that was a big challenge for us. So we made big progress, not enough.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, you and JB were two people who came to me and said, we should focus more on early childhood. That's where it all begins. And in some ways, I think you all feel that Head Start, if it has a flaw, is that it starts too late, that it's really 0 to 3 or even minus 9 months to 3. That's a window. Explain that to us.
Right. So at the foundation that I work at, we're focused on education from birth to the end of high school, but with a concentration on those first 5 years of life. And it's because of the science, actually. You just can't refute this. It's not opinion, it's not bias. It really is science, and it's out there. And if you take a good hard look at it, you're all going to want to go home and be brain builders and want to play with those kids. A child is born with billions of neurons, billions, right? But they're not connected. And they get connected through experience. So if you're sitting someplace in a tenement and there's no experiences for you, those connections are not being made very well. They're not very strong. So when you think, we all talk about all children here, but we just don't really do all children, right? We do some children. We do the ones that are easy to get to. We do the ones that whose parents really want that for them, but they're not always the ones that are at most risk, right, JB? They're the ones that they're still the easy ones. So we determined at the foundation we were going to go after the really hard ones, right? We were going to go after all children. And that's the reason we're not looking to Washington, D.C. to solve this problem. We're not, basing this on who's going to be in office, because as you say, it takes a long time to see the results. We're basing this on the family unit, which has kind of gone downhill. We're basing this on the parents. We're basing this on the community. And we've had, relative success at what we're doing, going into communities and giving them all of this science that they didn't know. We translated the science from 13 leading scientists into a 5th grade reading level. And then after we put it in the 5th grade reading level, we put it in bite-sized pieces and told parents, do this with your child. And it's easy and it's fun and it's doable.
Can you give us an example of the science?
I thought you'd never ask. So, I ended up with Spanish. I think my husband did that to me on purpose.
All right, Mike, you're in
Mike,
trouble.
do you want to come up here and...
All right. Mike, you come up and you...
Oh dear, I'm not sure I can do Spanish. It's going to take a little bit. So it would be something fairly simple and something that you might do with your child anyway, but do it with more intention. And one of the things we heard before we started on this journey was the fact that we didn't know the audience that we were trying to serve. And I agree we didn't. So we hired IDEO, the human-centered design firm out of San Francisco, to go across the nation 4 months, spend 4 months in the field talking to parents living in poverty and ask them what their aspirations were for their children. And what they, did they want a better life for their children than the life they had for themselves? And as you know, every child was loved by their parent. Every parent wanted a better life for their child than the life they had had. Did they know that they could affect the trajectory of their child? No, they really didn't. Did they want to know the science? You bet, they really wanted to know the science. And they told us how they wanted it, how they wanted it to come to them. They didn't want it to be preachy. They wanted it to be, we love our children, we want to do the best by them, but we don't want somebody coming and telling us what to do. So we tried to make it clever. So it'd be something like, boy, you're really putting me on the spot, Walter, without English. Mike, you're going to pay for this.
But you just show, you take a card that
Yeah,
and you
so,
show.
yeah, so,
I've done this with you.
oh, is that English?
Vroom.
Yeah. So it's called Vroom, and it's brain building moments. So I'm going to read you one that is for a 0 to 1-year-old child. So they're all segmented out by age. Grab whatever is nearby, like a blanket, a book, or your hands, and use it to play peekaboo with your child. First, you hide behind it, and then say peekaboo. Next, let your child be the hider. Pretty simple, right? Doesn't cost anything. You don't have to use any extra time. You could do it while you're waiting for the bus. So what just happened in your child's brain? Peekaboo helps your child learn that you are still there, even when you're hiding. But most of all, it's fun. Your face and voice are your child's favorite toys. Simple, right? Simple and touching. Builds a really great relationship between a parent and a child. This comes in physical forms, which have made their way into the women's prisons and the homeless shelters. So we're talking all children here. That's really what we're talking about.
See how many
JB,
Oh,
tell us.
Oh, wait. So Vroom is now in 121 countries in app form, and 100,000 families in the United States are using it across the United States.
Really
So-
great.
Very cool. And it's available in Spanish, as we know.
It is in Spanish.
JB, how did you come to this, and what have you learned?
Well, I maybe I ought to start by saying I spend some of my day as a venture capitalist, and so I'll talk about this in venture capital terms because, to be honest with you, it has all the characteristics of venture capital. First characteristic, of course, is we're investing early. But I will tell you that the nature of the capital investment and the return are also like venture capital. First, you rarely, as a venture capitalist, invest only one round of financing at one early stage in a company. The Bezoses know this. You need several rounds of financing to get your company to succeed. We fail, by the way, in the United States at getting several rounds of financing to get our children to succeed. But in this world of philanthropy, we have early stage investors like the ones that you have on stage, but we don't have partners for later stage investing. The government essentially fails in this. Despite the fact that we have early childhood funding in Head Start, what did the governor tell you? It wasn't nearly enough. It doesn't touch enough kids. And all the science, you heard Jackie say, all the science tells you everything you need to know, it works. You've got here an investment that you know works, and you know if you put the dollars in, you're going to get the return. Jim Heckman, the University of Chicago economist, Nobel Prize winning economist, and others have shown that for every dollar you invest in early childhood, you get $7 of return through the course of that child's life. You can't name another government program or another investment, or frankly, maybe another private investment on a regular basis that'll get you that return. So that's exciting to me, right? There's an opportunity there. I also think that we on this stage, and hopefully many of you in the audience, know that we can make a case to get the financing to come into this arena. The case is, so let's start with, and I'll put Governor Patrick to the side because he's an unusual and special case. Most politicians are driven by two things. They're driven by votes and money. and maybe I should speak to this side of the room, I saw the politicians. And frankly, the recipients of what we're suggesting, the at-risk kids and their parents, have no money and generally speaking don't vote. So for politicians, there's no return, at least in political terms. So this is a challenge. But the opportunity that we have is to go to like-minded people like Governor Patrick and others who understand that their legacy could be something significant, but long-term, by making this investment, and that we know what the returns are. I mean, we can talk about all of what the returns are, but suffice to say, we know what the returns are, and we know you can get it if you're willing to step forward and take the risk. But it's a legacy issue.
Give me one example of like a portfolio company, as you would call it, but in this space in which you've invested that you feel you've gotten a great return.
Yeah, so one of the challenges in the early childhood space is we've got to be able to reach a lot of kids. And you've got so scalability is a challenge in this arena. The returns that you get, so I'll give an example. George is involved with Nurse Family Partnership. You've funded it. And Nurse Family Partnership is this terrific home visitation program in which nurses literally visit the homes of newborns and their families, at-risk kids, and deliver to them not only the opportunity to have a kind of a brief wellness check, an interaction with the parents or parent to understand how they're operating as a parent within the home, to give them resources like Vroom, or to make them understand there are programs like a fussy baby hotline that exists in Illinois, which is a very important thing to avoid violence in the home. There's often the problem of a screaming baby that leads to a single parent who is driven, a bit mad by not being able to figure out how to address the baby's concern, going through all the simple things that we all know now, you go through, and then sometimes you can't stop the baby from crying. Knowing that there's a resource out there to call somebody, a hotline, to literally have them run you through all those steps and then tell you it's okay to close the door and let the child scream and maybe even step outside. Yeah. Now, you have no idea. That sounds like a simple thing, but do you have any idea the amount of money that we save by doing that? By simply having a person on the other end of the line that you can call, and that you do call. You avoid the domestic violence issue, you avoid the police call, you avoid the hospitalization, all of the costs endemic and all of that, not to mention, of course, you're saving the child. So that's an example of a small investment that leads to a big return. Across early childhood, those opportunities exist. But here's the thing. What you're looking at on stage here in George and in Jackie and me, I mean, honestly, when I go back home and I think about, how many private foundations are there that are investing in early childhood, that are leading in this space, I think I can count them on, my hand and maybe a few of my toes, and that's about it. I mean, that's my honest view of where we are, and it drives me, up a wall. Because we know this works. This is like a guaranteed investment. And yet people don't step forward, and it's because it isn't the headline. The K-12 education is the headline that everybody focuses on, and they don't go. And by the way, universal preschool is getting a lot of headlines, but the real place to put the money, and Sam implied it in his comments, and I think Jackie did in her comments, is, I was going to say 0 to 3, and I'll get in trouble with yeah, it was, but let's say -9 months to 3 years of age. Brain development is where this is about, and it'll make a huge difference in K-12 education if we just focus on dollars in that arena.
Well, it's great that we have the 3, and of course we have the Buffett for your friends, so that's 4 of the great foundations. George, you're one of them, obviously. Tell us about your foundation, your philanthropic work, what you've learned, and how you deal with birth to age 3.
Okay. Well, I think most of us choose our charitable purposes based on our life experiences. We give to the big four, I guess, of colleges and universities. We give to healthcare, either medical research or hospitals. We give to naming opportunities. In fact, we have a presidential candidate who is seeking the ultimate of naming opportunities as he resuscitates the Whig Party, the yellow.
With the yellow
The yellow version of the Whig Party, right? Yes. And yet, I tried to avoid to the greatest extent possible addressing my charitable purposes based on life experiences. You can't avoid it. But I think there were two motivations that caused me to seek out what I deemed to be the highest and best charity. The first was probably guilt. I think we all want to assume that we got where we got, or we accomplished what we accomplished because of our character and our intellect and our hard work and perseverance and so forth. And in fact, it's probably dumb luck because of the trillions of potential human beings that can be created at any given time. They're pretty well designated for certain places and times and genetics by a random assignment. And we happen to be born into an advanced society, or many of us, most of us, with loving parents, and I won't ask for a show of hands of those who didn't have loving parents. And so we had a tremendous leg up. And so that seems fundamentally unfair to me. It seems that one of the most moral things you can do is to provide equal opportunity for those who didn't have those advantages. And then the other motivation, I suppose, for how I got around to equal opportunity for young children as our primary charitable purpose, and for birth to 3 early childhood education and parent engagement, was the American national tradition, because our social contract is probably equal opportunity, enshrined all the way from the Declaration of Independence through the Gettysburg Address. And we distinguished ourselves from the old Europe by having class mobility. And yet we've lost that through the years to a very great extent. We are now less class mobile than the old Europe is. So how can we, and it seemed pretty easy to me that among the purest of charities and the most effective was equal opportunity for young children. And yet the answer that you often get from yourself and from others is that dirty little secret that resides in the back of our brains that says, yes, equal opportunity is an ideal, but you can't achieve it because it's all genetic and you can't do anything about it. So this brain science that Jackie talked about that has developed over the last 25 years was, if anything, an epiphany for me. Epiphanies don't really reside in my body. I'm a runner, and endorphins don't reside in my body either. But it was an epiphany for me because what the brain science said was that brain cells are essentially functionally unformed at birth. You could actually scrape the cells out of the brain and transplant them to the heart, liver, or kidneys. They'd become heart, liver, or kidney cells and wouldn't know what they were when they were young. In fact, it's little known that there's unintentional cell migration from the brain to other organs that cause some men to think with those other organs at times. It's in New York, that's known as the Spitzer principle. And I guess in South Carolina, it's the Sanders principle.
Doesn't happen in Nebraska.
Doesn't happen in Nebraska, no, I'm sure not. So, and I remember intimately that place before birth because it was warm and it was dark and it was wet and it was boring. And then suddenly I emerged and I was bombarded with sensory stimulation of all kinds. And that's how learning occurs. Your unformed brain cells have to, through a trial and error process, to attempt to make synaptical connections, electrical connections between and among the brain cells. And through that trial and error process, you learn cognitively, you learn socially, emotionally, you even learn executive function. Unless that is stimulated in a constructive fashion, starting at birth, and especially for the first 3 years when most of that brain development occurs, you can't accomplish what you want to accomplish. But the beauty of it and the epiphany of that is that that disproves that dirty little secret we have in the back of our brains, because maybe, just maybe, rich, smart parents have rich, smart kids because they also read to their kids, they put mobiles over their cribs playing annoying little ditties, and they send them off for SAT training at 6 months. And so it's at least possible, and I think likely based on the brain research, that all people really are created equal. And when in our founding, it was not all people, it was white male people. But by 1865 and 1919, we fixed some of that. So there is the opportunity then to create equal opportunity, and the key to it is adult-child contact very early in life. If it can't be done perfectly in the home, it should be done through birth to 3 early childhood education. And if we have some time later, I would be happy to talk about another direction that we've been taking the last 2 or 3 years, in which we engage parents. The other 95% of the children we aren't reaching through birth to 3 early childhood education, to assure that the same kind of constructive adult child intervention occurs.
Sam, let me have you pick up on something that George just talked about, which is the advances in brain science and learning science that have happened in the past 50 years since Head Start. How does that inform what we should be doing, and how would you have changed Head Start if we knew all that we know about brain science now?
Well, I think there's a tremendous amount of unanimity among all of us here, and that's, I think that's great, and Eric and I can take some credit for that, having invited all of you, right? But seriously, we are learning things almost day by day now about the impact actually of the environment and of environmental deprivation on brain growth and brain structure. So that we're finding out that children who are raised in family situations of poverty actually have a very different brain structure. They have less brain surface. There are changes in the white matter and the amygdala, all types of changes that are very, very important to exactly the kinds of things that George was just talking about.
Is that because synapse formation happens more slowly?
It is that. It is executive function. It is the way that emotion is expressed. It's impulse control. Many of these things are in fact connected there. And they say to us that the problems that we have been talking about, that we call by names, for example, generational poverty, are actually deeper than that. And they perhaps lend themselves to solution. And the solution that they lend themselves to, I think, are the kinds of things that all of us are doing, and that Governor Patrick supported and advocated for during the time he was governor, and before and after, no doubt. And that is to involve parents, to engage families, to bring children through a continuous process. The work we're doing here that I think is going to be very, very important is that we are starting exactly at birth or prenatally in the homes. We are then focusing after the first 3 years on rigorous preschool environments, on enriched preschool environments, and then continuing that through kindergarten through 3rd grade. One of the issues that I've heard from all of us today and that we overlook is that but we've used the word here, is this is all about investment. This is not about inoculation. We can't fix this. Originally, Head Start was for 3 and 4-year-olds. We can't fix it that way. We can't even fix it just birth to 3. I do believe we need to carry this further. We have the poorest children are enrolled in our society, are enrolled in Head Start. And then they go to the poorest elementary schools with with some teachers who are really extraordinary, but a lot of teachers who are not and who are paid poorly. We need to persist. Our hypothesis is that persistence of effort will yield persistence of effect. And that's what we're trying to do. So this is a long slog. This is something that takes many years. I believe that it will result in the kinds of greater equity than that we're all looking for.
Could I just add something I think is quite important and maybe overlooked in the conversation, which is, although we're all focusing on the fact that this is tremendously important for the kids and it has a big impact on their trajectory and their lives and their families, and we overlook the fact that there are some very big macroeconomic effects of doing this that should drive us and should drive all of the elected officials and all the philanthropists to dive into early childhood. And that is that we know that the outcomes that we get from, I talked about the return on the dollars, but the return on the dollars come from the fact that the kids who get early childhood education and minus 9 months to 3 years early childhood development are kids who, generally speaking, are a lot more likely to graduate from college, a lot more likely to get, and I say a lot more, there are statistics that I can cite to you, a lot more likely, though, to get jobs and to be of economic value in the United States and make the United States economically continue to be a powerhouse for the rest of the 21st century and into the 22nd, that we overlook that investment to our peril.
So when people say, why are you just focusing on these children? We need to tell them that the reason is because that will help all children.
That's right.
That
And all of society.
Otherwise, there will be a drag on the system. The impact on the GDP of reducing just by a few percentage points the achievement gap is immense.
Huge. And the moral
Let alone.
gap, too.
The
Deval?
numbers I remember were 40% a child who has the experience of quality early education, 40% less likely to need special education services, 5 times more likely to graduate from high school, 2 to 3 times more likely to graduate from college. All of that is not just to the child's benefit, to JB's point, but to all of our benefit. And this is back to a point I made earlier. It is so frustrating to be in the arena making this case and have everybody, business leaders, education leaders, parents in neighborhoods shaking their heads and saying this is right until it's time to pay the bill.
Right. And you are somebody who straddles all worlds now because you have a venture fund with Bain Capital, right? You've been in government, and you also have a life story that I think began on the south side of Chicago, if I'm correct. And how does that inform your view of how we invest?
So I grew up, you were talking, Jackie, about the parent in the sitting in the tenement with that kid. I grew up in a tenement on the south side of Chicago with my grandparents and my mother and my sister in the 50s and the 60s, and we had much of that time on welfare. Head Start hadn't been created, but we ate on account of food stamps, I will say, for some of that time. My mother and sister and I shared one of the 2 bedrooms in that tenement and a set of bunk beds. So you go from the top bunk to the bottom bunk to the floor every third night on the floor. I can't remember a time when I didn't love to read, but I don't think I ever owned a book until I got a break in 1970, a book of my own, in 1970 through a program called A Better Chance, and went to Milton Academy. Which is also J.B. Pritzker's alma mater.
So they've turned out 2 really good people.
But one thing
I heard he went there, so I decided I wanted to go. So.
But there was a truth in
Didn't you have trouble mailing off the application? Is that correct?
Oh, gracious, there are long stories there. Not suitable for today. But there was a lesson I learned there, even in those crowded and broken classrooms with crowded and broken children from crowded and broken homes, which is that nothing substituted for a well-prepared, engaged, and loving teacher in front of those kids. And we were hungry for it. And I remember this, in 6th grade and in 3rd grade and in kindergarten, that we were getting something from the teachers that a lot of us weren't getting at home. And you can extrapolate that to an earlier age. I can see what happens when that mom reads those Vroom cards to a 2-year-old, plays peekaboo with a 1-year-old. I can see that feeds that same hunger that sustains itself, frankly, right through childhood. So for us, it was. I ran for one office 2 times. And the beauty of not having politics as your career is that you can actually do the job without thinking about your career. And so for me, it was very much about these long-term impacts, not so much legacy, but what you were leaving to make the lives of the people you serve better. And I think that there is, to repeat, wide consensus about the long-term value and very thin political will to do what it takes to actually deliver it. And that's a question I think we all need to be grappling with.
Right, and that's what this is all about. Let me open it up, because I'm sure there are some really important questions. Gek, did you raise your hand, or did you? Or were you just scratching your beard? Go ahead. Yeah, you know, you get called on cold. This is Gil Cressberg, one of our hosts tonight. Thank you.
With regard to 0 to -9 months, what could you practically do and put in action if you had a checkbook right now?
Me? Well, one is I'd make sure everybody had a Vroom packet. I'm not kidding. You know, and if I may, I would just extend a little bit beyond your question and say I think another thing we learned is that it doesn't have to be the solution for every child and every family. In fact, that you had to have some latitude with good program leaders to deploy resources in ways that made a difference for individual kids. We would bring in to some of our underperforming K-8 schools early ed classes. This does not go to your question about 0 to 9, but early ed classes where we had City Year or other volunteers come in and help. And in the best of these, and there's only one example I can point to, they had essentially a daycare program, which was organized and supported by Bright Horizons on the private side. And it brought all of these tools and technologies in. It was really used as a pilot to see whether that was the kind of model that within the framework of an existing public school might work. A lot of the parents like that idea because we're sort of one-stop shopping for their...
Let me just add something else that you could do if you wanted to invest. First of all, you want to be sure there are prenatal visits. So you want to do whatever is needed in order to get people to actually go to those visits, to have the kind of care that they need, that they deserve, and that feels right to them. And it's also in a language that they understand. That's one thing. Another thing is something that the man I mentioned earlier, Irving Harris, was very invested in. That was doula care. Doula is a word that means companion. During pregnancy, a companion during pregnancy. It's not an everyday companion, but someone who helps you to understand that pregnancy, to start to think ahead to the birth of that child, begin to plan for it, who's there perhaps during the birth itself, and follows up with that child. And that can be a tremendously helpful kind of transition. So that's another area that you could be thinking of in a very practical way.
George and Jackie, anything on prenatal or -9 to birth?
You know, one of the things that we think is important at the foundation is that this is something that needs everybody to take a piece of it, right? We can't wait only on the government for funding, and we can't, you know, there's a lot of things we can't wait for. But if we look inside ourselves, we're going to find out that each one of us has an asset to bring to this. And that's the tactic that we've been using at the foundation is going to others, partnering with them. And you know, the unexpected suspect, right? Like Johnson & Johnson. They've got access, they've got products. They can put the products on the shelf. Parents are going to buy the product. They need to have a brain-building tip on the product. Diapers. There are 8,000 diaper changes in the first 3 years. That's 8,000 opportunities if there was just a brain-building tip on the front of the diaper or the back for, you know, a mother to interact or a caregiver to interact with a child. So the bus driver, I mean, his asset is the first 3 steps when she comes to get on that bus holding that baby, and he can look at her and say, wow, you're building a brain today. The checkout clerk at Walmart, I don't ever want to hear the throwaway line, have a nice day again. I want to hear her say, way to go, brain builder, to a mother. So we need to really put the expectations broadly on our country if we really want to build an early learning nation. We all have to participate.
Great. It's hard for me to, yes, Doran. I'll try to look in the back, but there's a light in my eye, so we'll start with Doran. Yeah.
This is great and near and dear to my heart. I would love to know what you might do to bring over as public nutritional guidance for prenatal
early children nutritional is the question. JB, did you want to take that?
Not my expertise,
Okay,
so I won't go to.
anybody?
So I think that once you
Nutrition.
start building a platform that really becomes a delivery system, right?
Yeah.
Then you can load it up with tidbits, advice, things like that. So I was with the president of the American Academy of Pediatrics a couple of days ago in DC, and she's very focused, of course, on child's health. But she's wrestling with how do I reach parents? And I think technology is giving us a lot of ways to reach parents now. Everybody has a smartphone, but you've got to really be asset-based when you go to these parents and encourage them. You know, let them know they have what it takes to be a brain builder and to do good health and all the rest of these things. It has to be really asset-based for them too.
Let me develop the
Yeah,
concept
George.
a little bit that Jackie has commented on several times, because we're all talking here about Head Start, which was the reason, the organizing theme of this discussion. And we've talked about how it's frustrating that we kind of know what to do, but society is not going to allocate the resources necessary to do it. And I think the epiphany I had, and that Jackie had probably before me, is that virtually every mom and most of the dads desperately want what's best for their newborn baby. And yet they're not delivering it. And why are they not delivering it? Either because they don't know what to do, which is possible, or they don't feel capable of doing it, or they don't have the time and energy left in the day after the hassles of daily life in a poor income household to deliver the quality experience with their young children. So what we have started, and using a lot of what Jackie's doing as well, is a program in which we contact every newborn mom in our county, Tulsa County, 10,000 kids a year, with a nurse stationed in every hospital within the community, to talk to them about the issues that they're going to deal with their baby, the value of communication and reading. We bring them a toolkit designed for us by Sesame Street, with all of the Sesame Street characters and with starter books and with a lot of the cues that Jackie was talking about on a onesie or a bib or a placemat or whatever. Then we follow that up with several other points of contact. The Vroom electronic push texting is one idea. But the second most effective contact, trying to reach young lower income families where they are through a source they trust and with lots of repetition, is the pediatric office, because almost all of them are going to go to the pediatric office 5 or 6 times in the first year. Pediatrician cannot afford to provide this education to every patient and get them in and out within 12 to 15 minutes to be able to make a living. So the pediatrician refers the patient to his colleague, or her colleague more commonly, who will be the patient's next appointment. And that person is a social worker or a psychologist who is embedded within the pediatric practice, who does the well baby checks and then also delivers books and delivers good parenting practices, and then continuing on through the pastor and so forth, and a whole series of contacts with the mom. And that way we reach 100% of the kids, not the 5% or so that we reach through early Head Start, and we do it at a much more effective cost with a delivery agent who desperately wants to do it.
Wave your hand if you would. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear you talk about time. My own background, I'm a faculty member here at UNL. My research area is child maltreatment. And I'm interested in the fact that you just talked about time, because actually that's where my question was going to go. Some of you may be aware of Kathy Eden and Luke Schaefer's book that has just been released in the past week, $2 a Day, Living on Next to Nothing in America. And one of those issues precisely is time. And we're talking about people who are so poor that they can't afford smartphones, they can't afford the data plans for those. They are far more isolated, and they're literally basic needs every day in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and trying to talk about time and what it looks like at that level of poverty to invest in parents, and I'm thinking about that because in my work in child welfare, the only difference between the childhoods they had, the childhoods their own children have, is surveillance from the child welfare system. And in many cases, when people are reaching out to their children, they are actually resentful. And there's this entire history of re-traumatization from their own poverty in childhoods. And how can we help parents and invest in parents when they're in the middle of this cycle of wanting their children to get out, but also reliving it while they're parenting their own children from their own experiences?
So,
JB first.
well, I just wanted
Sam.
to, I'll defer to the expert in a moment, but I will say that one of the big challenges is that the delivery mechanism, and you mentioned it, George, the delivery mechanism very hard to come by, and the result is, FYI, because of this lack of time and lack of resources, by the way, there's something like 60% of low-income households whose children are, the touch point for the children is friends, family, and neighbors. Nothing institutional at all. There's no educare, there's no other program for them. It's just someone down the street that's taking care of their child, basically. And so if you think about that as the center focus, because it's the thing that is most available by time, right? And yet there are no services that get delivered in friends, family, neighbors, typically. We have a very hard time. It's like this, it's frankly, it's this dark room that most folks, including government, haven't entered, friends, family, neighbors. And that is where I think many of the people that you're talking about have their touch points. We've got to figure out how to get to those local, literally by block, those grandmothers and other single mothers who've been willing to take in children who have the touch point with a lot of exactly these parents.
These friends, families, neighbors, of course, are a very, very important part of the social fabric, but they're also what we call unlicensed childcare. And, on a very restricted way of thinking about it. And again, not to castigate them all. Some of it is just right. Some of it's the only right thing, the only thing that's possible. But some of it isn't. Some of it is dangerous. Some of it is not advancing childhood development, you can well imagine. We have enough problem with licensed childcare, let alone unlicensed. So that's a big deal here. But what I'm hearing in Claudette's question...
That's why nobody wants to delve into it. That's a little bit the problem.
They can't find it.
They can't find it. It's difficult. It takes time to figure out, but we've got to do it.
But what we're also talking about is isolation. And isolation can be when you're surrounded by people, you still can be isolated. In this state, so it's a very interesting question, because in this state, we have a huge rural area of this state. I was about to say a huge rural population. Not quite. We have a small population living in a huge rural area, and even what we sometimes call a frontier area here. So how do you get there, as well as how do you get into the urban isolation? And one way that I think about this is to try to find people who are very similar. Find people from the neighborhood, find people from the town. We're talking about towns of 50 people here in Nebraska, Oklahoma, no doubt, all around, all over the country. And we have to bring people who are trusted, who are allies, who are not like us specifically, but people who are from their neighborhood, from their world, and we have to help those people to know what to do to help the people who are so isolated.
I see way in the back there a hand. I mean, the red shirt, I can't even see the color of the shirt given the lighting, but yes, the gentleman. Yeah.
Get one up.
And one upstairs too, we'll get to next. Yeah.
So a lot of kids are being raised, because this is intergenerational, by parents and or grandparents who themselves don't have these kinds of skills. So it's great to be able to give them tools, but if they don't literally have the wherewithal, psychologically, physically, to make use of the tools, it's not very helpful. I'm wondering what, if anything, we're doing to identify these caregivers and to get them the kind of therapeutic treatment they need to, to have the kind of integrity, not just of desire, but of ability to actually share these things with their children. Thank you.
Samuel, what's that? Yeah.
Well, we see in a lot of places that there are tremendous mental health needs. And that can be, and it's mostly associated with poverty more than it is with a place. But it is something that we don't pay enough attention to. In Chicago, where I was working before, and some of my colleagues have been working, there we see tremendous mental health needs among the professionals, as well as among families, as well as among the children themselves. So teachers who are being exposed to children coming in who have been experiencing hunger over the weekend because the school wasn't there to feed them, or physical abuse of the child. Those people are very deeply affected by this as well. So this is yet another area that we need to work on. It's an area that I don't think we ought to bring a squad of psychologists into. I think the psychologists and social workers need to work with people in the neighborhood. Again, the trusted older heads who are there, the people who know the community, know the families, are trusted, and they get help and then they give help.
Was there somebody? Yeah, why don't you either shout it out, or if you have a microphone, that's cool.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good.
With such a large focus on the negative month to 3-year time frame of life, I'm wondering if any of you can talk about the connection between the process of breastfeeding as it relates to brain building and synaptical development, so not just from a nutritional standpoint.
Not a lot of experts here. I'm not one of them. We do know it's a good thing. We see evidence almost, it seems like weekly or monthly, that shows that breastfeeding is associated with brain development. You also look at it, the closeness, you can have that with a bottle too, but the closeness, and here I am, the man talking, right?
We can be close.
But I watched it. That relationship that begins, that's unique between mom and child, is something that is enhanced by this. But maybe
Right.
others have more to add.
Further questions? I can't. Yes. Oh, Eric?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Mr. Kaiser, could you speak a bit about meeting the parent in the hospital?
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, in the program that we are implementing to address contact with the parents, we have a registered nurse assigned to every hospital who meets with every parent of every newborn, triages, so they're meeting with 10,000, of which perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 need some follow-up. So they triage those families, they register the contact, they make sure that they receive the parenting kit and the instruction, or the counseling or advice or exchange, and then they are followed through to the pediatric office, and if possible through the other contact points. But in every case, the rules are a trusted source, where the family is likely to be, and repetition. I think it's the only way we're going to solve this problem because we are not going to solve it through center-based education or institutional education for every newborn child.
Now, George, earlier you had said that there was something else you might want to get to about parenting. Was that it? Or
Yeah, it's that, and I thought perhaps the question of, since the topic was Head Start, that there might be some reference to 1 or 2 studies which occurred that suggested that the gains, which are very measurable in early childhood education, you go from about 74 or 75% of parity when you enter the program. If you're into 3 years, you get to parity or above. And then by the time you enter school, and then there are some studies that suggest a fade thereafter. And that has discouraged a lot of politicians and philanthropists, because they see this as an end result that doesn't last. And my response, I think, is that the study was of Head Start, which doesn't start until age 3 at the earliest, and that is too late from what Dr. Meisels has said and the rest of us have. It also is providing that the deficit arises out of early child education, when in fact the deficit occurs when the child is placed in K-12, and we know we have an issue with K-12 education. It also is the wrong measurement point, because we're measuring 3rd grade IQ, and success in life is not a function of 3rd grade IQ. It's a function of what they call executive function It's a function of social emotional development and so forth, and those have been shown to persist a lot longer than traditional IQ tests. And then Head Start has historically started as a social service program predominantly, has not until very recent years had a lot of outcomes measurement. It has had some safety measurement, but not outcomes measurement. And so the programs that are offered, 16,000 of them, did you say, Di, are uneven. And some of them work and some of them do not work. So I wouldn't want anybody to come away from reading one of those studies or hearing about the so-called fade effect to believe that early childhood education does in fact lose its benefit over time, because it's pretty clear that it does not.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question over there. Walter?
Okay, sorry. There and then there. Okay, there and then there. Yeah. I think somebody has a mic already.
You know, one of the things I noticed about this entire panel is that we're trying to solve a problem that you're not actually attacking fundamentally, which is the great poverty of people in the United States. It's an enormous problem, and any idea that you can teach them very much because of the difficulties they have of getting work and getting enough to eat and all the other aspects of human life, it's just kind of silly to me, because I've spent a lot of time on the subject of early childhood with my foundation. And I keep looking at now as purely a matter of political action, that we should definitely stop this business of allowing enormous wealth to overcome everyone else. Mm-hmm. And just think about it, that if we had only a few million people rather than several hundred or 50 million very poor people in this country, how much more we would be able to do. Another thing about this is that we believe that putting people in jail is somehow going to solve problems. And
well, let me put to the panel, and I'll start with George because he's got his finger up. The whole question, my wife is involved in women's foundations that do whole wraparound services for women, for poverty, for whatever. To what extent does this have to be put in a package of dealing with poverty in the United States? And to what extent can we focus on this as one element of a problem to solve?
There's no question it's a package. We addressed in our foundation equal opportunity for young children. Early childhood education is one element of it. The panel was organized over that, around that subject, so we've talked the most about it. But it is a necessary component, but far from sufficient. And I'll mention two more, one that you referenced and one the questioner referenced. The one that you mentioned, opportunity for women and incarceration, and maybe combining the two. We incarcerate far, far too many people in this country. It is damaging to the person incarcerated. It destroys the family. When mom's taken away, the young child feels that he or she did something wrong. He's then thrown into an environment in which he's learning from peers who are not giving him constructive advice. So fortunately, that's a concern or a concept that has universal support now. It's the impetus for it, for revising our incarceration system, is coming from the right and from the left. When you have a meeting with the Koch brothers and the Center for American Progress, you know that you have a consensus. We have a program, for example, in which the judges, and universally the judges support this. The district attorneys not always. The judges will assign to a program to alternate a program for women who are about ready to be sentenced to 6 to 10 years in prison, who we call it women in recovery, who are taken out of that environment, spend up to 18 months, 40 hours a week to 10 hours a week, reversing the cycle at their level. And we need to be incarcerating far fewer people for far lesser time. The other program I would refer to that is one of 8 or 10 or 12 that need to be in the package is a long-acting reversible contraceptive program, because the greatest predictor of poverty is the age of a child age of the mother at the first child's birth, and the spacing between children. And if there are long-acting reversible contraceptives that can assure that the child is not born at too early an age or too soon after a prior child. And those programs are showing remarkable success in Tulsa and in Colorado and St. Louis and elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So that's there are dozens more we could talk about, but clearly it's a package of programs.
Well, I just want to, I'm sympathetic to the spirit of the question, but I couldn't agree more that poverty is the root of much of what ails us in this country and what is hurting many hurting families. I don't think anybody on the panel is of the view that early education is the sine qua non of solving poverty. It's certainly not my view, and I think one problem we often have from a policy point of view is that we keep looking for that silver bullet rather than several of the paths out of poverty. I don't know about the rest of you, but I grew up in poverty, and as I said earlier, and education was a critical part of the path for me. I did not have access to early education, but I did have one of those neighborhoods you described where every child was under the jurisdiction of every adult on the block. Right. And they all acted like, if you messed up down the street in front of Miss Jones, she'd go upside your head as if you were hers. And they all talked to us and coached us and paid attention to comportment and manners and raised our expectations of ourselves and made clear that they had high expectations of us. And there were others to whom we were handed along the path, educationally and professionally. In my case, and in the case of too few others, but some others that helped us lift out of poverty. So I don't want you to be left with the impression, and I'm very, very sympathetic to your point about the root of many of our troubles, that anybody on this panel anyhow believes that early education all by itself will solve poverty. But I think we are persuaded by experience and data that it is a powerful component, a powerful stepping stone on that path out of poverty, and we ought to pay attention to it.
Governor, you may have heard, you probably heard Colin Powell talk about the fact that when he grew up there was no internet, but there was an auntie net.
Yeah, right.
Because auntie would sit on the flower box and look out the window, and anything you were doing that day got reported back.
Let me do the last question right here, if I may. Yeah. You seem like you'll have a big voice, or? Oh, all right, here comes the mic.
I guess maybe to the point of intranet to Antoinette, with every one of you talked about the importance of brain stimulation. What are the concerns, or are there from a scientific perspective, as to the technological world we live in today and the substitute of human interaction for brain stimulation versus technology? And the question comes from seeing parents today putting iPads on baby seats so the kids are watching something electronic as opposed to the human interaction. Yeah. What are the thoughts on that?
Well, there's some terrific research out of the University of Washington showing that without interaction, without actually free playing together, without a parent or another adult being there with the child's going to learn virtually nothing. And of course, I don't know that there are necessarily negative effects, but American Academy of Pediatrics says no screen time before age 2. I agree with that. I think after that, moms and dads need to be there. They need to be part of all that. The touch screen has changed the entire game. so that it is actually interactive and interesting and not just coming at you, but you can do things, you can change it yourself. But still, having the parent there or having an adult there is a key part of this. Never replaces that. What I think several of us, all of us have probably said, is it comes down to adult-child interaction. That's the hardest thing. One reason Head Start's not been more successful is that it hasn't had enough trained adults who are able to do all of those things. And this is where we have to go, as keep working on in the future.
Let me have the panel do the last word rather quickly, I hope, and I'll start with you, George, and go down. If there's one thing you could have people do, either as a philanthropist or a policymaker, what would it be? What idea would you push?
Proselytize on the value of adult-child interaction very early in life through early child education, through parent-child contact, and make it an important enough issue that policymakers will listen to it, because it polls very well in popularity, but it's not the issue that people will vote about, and so they need to hear about it often. It is not a partisan issue. There are as many Republicans who are strongly supportive of early child education as there are Democrats, but it is just not the key issue in anyone's mind, as are the so-called social issues of our day.
Well, and that leads up to what my big ask, right? We can't wait for government to do this. This can be done in communities. It can be done by people like us to encourage child and parent interaction. So my big ask of you today is to consider yourself a brain builder, and every adult in the life of a child as a brain builder.
Well, I would just build on that, and you've made this point a couple of times really well, Jackie, that everybody at every station has the ability to impact in a very positive and powerful way the development of a young child. And we can do that in programs, but we can also do that in programs with all kinds of fancy materials. We can also do that in more intimate interactions with children, with just the stuff around in your own being present. And I think so raising this notion, this understanding that we all have this opportunity to impact, I think is enormously important, and it will, I think, also build the political will while we wait for politics to catch up, but the political will to do what needs to be done.
Well, I had the great good fortune of having a kind of a mentor in this early childhood arena that brought me into it and showed me places in which I might be able to make a difference. And that was Irving Harris, and then passed on to people like Sam and, frankly, George Kaiser, and now Jackie. And I must tell you that it is hard to find the answer to your question. And so, with the risk of sounding promotional, we put together a white paper, talked to the folks who work with George, we talked to George and to Jackie and to others who have spent a lot of time in this arena, including public officials, and put together a white paper with 13 specific recommendations about things that philanthropists and others can do to advance to promote early childhood, to advance it in a public arena, as well as from a philanthropic perspective.
And so tell us where to find it.
That'll come out in about 3 weeks, so you'll be able to find it online.
The Pritzker Foundation?
Yeah, you'll be able to find it through Pritzker Family Foundation.
Well, it's hard to be last, especially since I agree with everything that has been said. So to put it in simple terms, we have to improve the quality, the quantity, and the skills of the people interacting with our children. They need to know more. Our families need to know more. Our teachers need to know more. Our principals and directors of programs need to know more. And of course, we need to know more as well. But quality, quantity, and skills.
Professor, all of you on the panel, governor, philanthropist, all of you in the audience, thank you for what you do. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Very good, George.